The night my brother was celebrated as the pride of our family, my parents looked me straight in the eyes and called me the embarrassment we wish wasn't born. I sat there frozen as the words echoed in my chest, while they clinked glasses of champagne and cheered for him. I wanted to disappear, but instead I watched as they smiled with pride that had never once been directed at me. My father, Callum Harper, stood tall at the head of the table. He was a man who carried himself like he owned the world, because in many ways he did. With a booming voice that commanded attention, he raised his glass toward my brother. My mother, Maren, elegant as ever, leaned into his side with a look of pure adoration for the son who could do no wrong. My brother, Dorian, sat in the spotlight they had built for him since the day he was born. That night, he had an acceptance letter to Harvard in his hand, and every pair of eyes in the room fixed on him with admiration. He basked in it, smiling modestly, but I knew he loved every second. Meanwhile, I sat at the far end of the table, deliberately placed away from the laughter and the cameras flashing for family photos. No one asked me to speak, no one wanted me in the frame. I was the second son, the one they never mentioned unless they were comparing me to him. And now, in the middle of their celebration, they decided to strip away even the thin veil of civility, branding me with words I had feared my whole life. The embarrassment we wish wasn't born. The sting of those words wasn't new, but hearing them out loud in front of relatives and friends made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. At that moment, I thought it would be another night where I stayed quiet, swallowed the humiliation, and let them pretend I didn't exist. But I had no idea that one day those very same people would be forced to look at me differently, and it all began with the sealed envelope handed to me at the moment I least expected. Growing up in the Harper household was like living under a spotlight that was never meant for me. From the outside, we looked perfect. A wealthy family with a towering mansion in New York, expensive cars in the driveway, and a father who owned one of the most successful private companies in the city. People envied us. They assumed life inside those walls was something to be desired. They did not know what it was like to be invisible in a house full of people who claimed to be your family. My father, Callum Harper, was the kind of man who believed in power above all else. He built Harper Industries from the ground up with his own father and turned it into a $20 million empire. He was sharp, demanding, and ruthless in business. At home, he carried that same attitude into every conversation. He expected perfection and had no patience for anything less. When he looked at me, it was not with anger or disappointment. It was worse. It was indifference, as if I were nothing more than a shadow that walked through his house. My mother, Maren, was always at his side. She was graceful, beautiful, and socially polished, but her heart was colder than anyone realized. To the outside world, she was the perfect hostess, smiling at charity galas, throwing lavish parties, and supporting her husband's every decision. Behind closed doors, she measured love by achievement. She poured everything into Dorian, because he was the son who fit her vision of success. She rarely spoke to me except to remind me of something I had done wrong, or to say things like, "Rowan, why can't you be more like your brother?" She said it so often that it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like a verdict. Then there was Dorian, my brother, 2 years older than me, and the golden child of the Harper family. From the time we were children, he was everything my parents wanted in a son. He was athletic, intelligent, charming, and endlessly praised. If he brought home a trophy, it was displayed in the grand hall. If I brought home a drawing or a decent grade, it was tossed aside without comment. Dorian never went out of his way to be cruel, but he never lifted me up either. To him, I was simply the younger brother who trailed behind, a presence that didn't matter. He knew he was the favorite, and he wore that crown with comfort. The differences in how we were treated showed up everywhere. At dinner, Dorian sat beside my father while I sat further down. At the school events, my parents sat in the front row for his performances, and skipped mine entirely. On birthdays, his were celebrated with extravagant parties and expensive gifts, while mine were acknowledged with a single cake on the kitchen counter. I learned quickly that no matter what I did, it would never be enough to change the way they saw me. By the time I turned 22, the pattern was cemented. I was still living in New York, working part-time jobs to get by, trying to find my own place in a world that had never handed me anything. I had no seat at Harper Industries. My father made sure of that. He once told me, "Rowan, not everyone is built to carry responsibility. Dorian was born for it. You should be grateful you don't have that pressure." He said it with a tone that sounded like wisdom, but I knew it was nothing more than dismissal. Inside, I carried a quiet storm. I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to show them that I was not the embarrassment they had painted me to be. But when you hear the same words repeated over and over for years, they start to carve themselves into your bones. I fought daily with the voice in my head that said I would never be enough. When Dorian's acceptance to Harvard came, it felt like the final nail in my coffin. My father announced it like the second coming of Christ. "My son has been accepted to Harvard," he declared to anyone who would listen, "and he will carry the Harper name into the future with honor." My mother cried tears of joy. Relatives called to congratulate them. The mansion was decorated with banners and flowers. And me? I stood in the corner, holding a tray of drinks for guests, while people brushed past me as if I were part of the staff. That was the night my parents let their contempt slip into words. In the middle of the celebration, as they toasted Dorian, my father leaned toward my mother and said, loud enough for me to hear, "At least one of our sons makes us proud. The other is the embarrassment we wish wasn't born." My mother nodded in agreement, clinking her glass against his. Some of the guests laughed uncomfortably. Others pretended not to notice, but no one defended me, not even Dorian. I remember gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. Shame burned in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shout that I was more than the labels they gave me, but my voice never left my throat. I did what I had always done. I stayed quiet because silence was safer than making myself an even bigger target. As the music played and the celebration continued, I slipped away to the back of the room. I stood in the shadows, watching the family I was born into treat me like a stranger. I told myself it would always be this way. They would celebrate him and ignore me. They would inherit the future and I would be left with scraps. What I could not imagine then was that the very foundation of their power would one day be shaken, and I would be the one holding the truth that would change everything. The Harvard celebration marked the beginning of a long season of humiliation for me. My father's words that night did not fade into the air. They followed me into every corner of my life. I carried them like a scar burned into my skin, a reminder that I was not welcome in the family I was born into. The days after the party were a blur of endless praise for Dorian. My father brought him into the company headquarters and introduced him to executives as the future of Harper Industries. My mother bragged to her friends about how her son would soon walk the halls of Harvard and someday manage millions. Meanwhile, I was left at home, waiting tables at a small restaurant in the city, coming back to an empty apartment with rent that barely fit my paycheck. The contrast was brutal. One evening, I returned to the mansion, hoping for even a moment of acknowledgement. The house smelled of expensive wine and roasted lamb. Guests filled the dining hall again, celebrating another of Dorian's accomplishments. My father noticed me step through the doorway and raised an eyebrow. "Rowan," he said flatly, "you should not come here unless you are invited. This is Dorian's night." His voice carried through the room, silencing the chatter. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, judging me, labeling me the intruder in my own family's home. I muttered something about just wanting to say congratulations and slipped out before anyone could laugh. Outside, the night air was cool, but my chest felt like it was on fire. Every time I tried to step into their world, they reminded me I did not belong. The years passed, and the divide only widened. Dorian excelled at Harvard, while I scraped together jobs to survive. I fixed cars, stocked shelves, and worked shifts in restaurants where customers treated me the way my parents did, like I was invisible. Each time my paycheck came, I thought about how my father's company made millions while I could not afford health insurance. Despite everything, I still longed for their approval. I would catch myself wondering if one day I might do something extraordinary enough to make them see me differently. But then the memory of that night of being called the embarrassment we wish wasn't born would rise in my mind, and I knew the truth. To them I was not their son, I was their shame. When the day of Dorian's graduation arrived, the family prepared for it like it was a royal coronation. We all traveled to Cambridge, though my presence was more of an obligation than an invitation. My mother reminded me to sit in the back, away from the cameras, so the family photos would look polished. "We cannot afford distractions on Dorian's big day," she said. Her words were polite on the surface, but the message was sharp. I was the distraction. The ceremony was grand. Dorian wore his cap and gown with the same confidence he carried through life. My parents glowed with pride as they shook hands with professors and alumni. When the graduates tossed their caps into the air, the crowd erupted with cheers. I clapped too, though it felt like I was clapping for a play I had no part in. That evening, there was a lavish dinner in his honor. Crystal glasses lined the tables. The hall was filled with wealthy guests, family friends, and business partners. My father stood once more at the head of the room, commanding attention as only he could. With a booming voice, he raised his glass high. "Tonight, we celebrate my son, Dorian Harper," he declared. "He has proven himself worthy, not only of Harvard's acceptance, but also of the Harper name. And now, it is time to share what we have kept within the family." The guests leaned forward, eager for the announcement. My father's voice deepened with pride. "As of this day, Dorian will inherit everything that belongs to the Harper legacy. The company, the New York mansion, and the full estate will pass to him. He will carry the future on his shoulders, as it was always meant to be." The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. Guests stood to honor Dorian. My mother kissed his cheek. My brother smiled with that same modest expression, though I could see in his eyes that he relished every moment. I sat in the back, my chair pushed against the wall, hidden by shadows. Humiliation wrapped around me tighter than ever. My father's words were not just a public announcement, they were a public execution of whatever dignity I had left. He had stripped me of any chance to be recognized as part of the family, and he had done it proudly in front of hundreds of witnesses. My chest ached as the applause roared on. I tried to stay still, to swallow the humiliation the way I always had. I lowered my gaze, pretending to study the linen folded on my plate, but inside I was breaking. For years, I had endured the quiet dismissal, the private whispers, the endless comparisons. But this was different. This was my father standing in front of a crowd and declaring to the world that I was nothing. I clenched my fists under the table. A part of me wanted to stand and shout, to tell the guests that I was more than the shadow of my brother. But I could not move. Fear kept me frozen. Fear of ridicule, fear of rejection, fear that if I spoke, I would only make things worse. As the laughter and music filled the hall, I sank deeper into silence. I told myself this was the role I was destined to play, the forgotten son, sitting quietly in the background, while my family celebrated a legacy I would never touch. What I did not know was that the night was not over. The humiliation I felt would not be the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because when the lawyer walked in carrying that sealed envelope, the very foundation of everything my father had just declared was about to crumble. The applause for my father's announcement still thundered in the room when the doors at the back of the hall creaked open. At first, no one paid attention. All eyes remained fixed on Dorian, who stood beside our father with his glass raised like a king receiving his crown. But then the sound of measured footsteps carried through the marble floor, and the room began to hush. A tall man in a dark gray suit walked forward. He had a presence that immediately demanded attention, not with arrogance but with a quiet authority. His hair was streaked with silver, and he carried a leather briefcase that swung lightly by his side. The crowd turned their heads as he moved past the tables, his gaze fixed on one person, me. When he reached my seat at the back, he stopped and lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Rowan Harper?" he asked. I nodded, unsure what to say. No one ever sought me out at these events. He slipped a sealed envelope from his briefcase and placed it in front of me. Leaning close, he whispered, "It's time they finally learn the truth." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I stared at the envelope resting against the white linen of the tablecloth. The weight of it felt heavier than paper, as though it contained something powerful, something dangerous. My father's voice boomed from across the room. "What is this? Who are you?" He sounded irritated, almost offended that his perfect evening had been interrupted. The man turned to face him. "My name is Adrian Cole. I am an attorney representing the estate of Elias Harper." The name of my grandfather seemed to silence the entire hall. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the string quartet in the corner faltered for a moment. My grandfather Elias had built Harper Industries from nothing. His name still carried weight, even though he had passed away years ago. Adrian looked back at me. "Mr. Harper left instructions that this envelope be delivered to you on this night, in this setting, in front of your family." Dozens of eyes burned into me. My father's face darkened with suspicion, while my mother looked pale. Dorian frowned, as though the spotlight he loved so much had just been threatened. I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling. For a moment, I considered hiding it away, waiting until I was alone to read it. That was the safer path. If I stayed quiet, if I kept it hidden, the night would pass like all the others. I would be humiliated, yes, but I would survive. But another voice rose inside me, stronger this time. For years, I had been silent. For years, I had let them decide who I was. Maybe this envelope was nothing. Maybe it contained words of kindness meant only for me. Or maybe it was more. Whatever it was, my grandfather had chosen this moment for me to reveal it. He had trusted me to stand in front of them, not to shrink away. I felt my father's eyes drilling into me. "Rowan," he barked, "whatever nonsense this is, deal with it later. Sit down and do not disrupt this celebration." His words, once enough to silence me, only fueled my resolve. My chest pounded as I pushed back my chair and rose to my feet. The noise of the chair scraping against the floor echoed like a challenge. For the first time in my life, the room was watching me, not Dorian. I held the envelope in my hand, the wax seal unbroken. "This was left for me by Elias Harper," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was meant to be opened tonight, here, in front of everyone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother whispered urgently to my father, but he waved her off. Dorian crossed his arms, his jaw tight with frustration. My fingers hovered over the seal. I could feel the sweat on my palms, the rapid beat of my heart, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I broke the seal, nothing would ever be the same again. I would be stepping into a storm I had no way of predicting. But if I did not open it, I would remain the shadow they always wanted me to be. I thought of every insult, every ignored birthday, every moment I had been cast aside. I thought of the night they called me, the embarrassment they wished wasn't born. And then I thought of my grandfather, the one person who had shown me kindness when I was a child. He used to place a hand on my shoulder and say, "Rowan, you see people for who they are. That will always matter more than what they see in you." With that memory steadying me, I slid my thumb under the seal and broke it open. The sound was small, but in the silence of the hall, it rang like thunder. The paper inside was crisp, folded neatly in three. I unfolded it slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on me. My voice shook at first, but I forced it out. This is the last will and testament of Elias Harper. The room froze. My father's face twisted in disbelief. My mother's hand clutched the edge of the table. Dorian shifted uncomfortably. The applause from earlier now, a memory drowned in silence. I looked down at the words again, my eyes widening as the meaning sank in. My grandfather had not left his legacy to the son they celebrated. He had not entrusted it to the man who built an empire on cold ambition. He had left it to me. The weight of that truth pressed against my chest, demanding to be spoken aloud. My voice grew stronger. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid to be heard. My hands trembled as I held the paper, but my voice was steady. "This is the last will and testament of Elias Harper," I repeated. The silence in the hall was suffocating. Every guest leaned forward, waiting to hear words that would either confirm or shatter everything my father had just announced. I cleared my throat and began to read. "I, Elias Harper, being of sound mind, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including Harper Industries, the Manhattan property, and all associated holdings, to my grandson, Rowan Harper." The words echoed through the room like a gunshot. Gasps filled the hall. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble floor. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, her face drained of color. My brother's expression twisted into something I had never seen before. Fear, disbelief, and anger colliding at once. My father was frozen, his glass still raised in the air. For the first time in my life, Callum Harper did not have a response ready. His face turned red as the reality of the words sank in. He slammed the glass down on the table so hard it cracked. "This is a fraud," he thundered. "My father would never bypass me or Dorian for him." Adrian Cole, the lawyer, stepped forward calmly, unfazed by my father's fury. "This will was signed, witnessed, and notarized legally. Elias Harper left strict instructions that it be revealed tonight. I have copies filed with the courts. This is authentic." The crowd erupted in whispers. Guests who had applauded Dorian minutes ago now turned toward me with wide eyes. I could feel the shift in the room, the sudden weight of attention I had never known before. My father's voice grew louder. "Impossible. Rowan is nothing. He has no place in this family's legacy." I lowered the paper and looked directly at him. "You told me that my entire life. But your father saw me differently. He saw something in me you never wanted to acknowledge." My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Rowan, this cannot be right. There must be another explanation." Dorian stepped forward, his composure cracking. "This is ridiculous. Everyone knows I've worked for this, not him. He doesn't deserve any of it." He jabbed a finger at me as if I were an imposter standing in his throne room. I met his gaze and said, "Deserve? Do you think I did not want their approval? Do you think I did not fight every day to be noticed, to be treated like I mattered?" Grandfather saw more than achievements on paper. He saw who we were when no one else was watching. The lawyer cleared his throat and read aloud a final passage from the will. "I leave my legacy to Rowan because he has endured with patience and integrity. While others sought power, he showed humility. While others demanded recognition, he kept faith in his own path. My company was built on resilience and honesty. Rowan is the only one who carries that spirit forward." The hall was silent again. The words hung in the air like a final judgment. My father's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. Dorian's fists balled at his sides, his face burning with rage. My mother turned her face away, unable to meet my eyes. I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had been buried under their contempt, convinced I was worthless. But now, with my grandfather's words in my hand, I felt taller, stronger. I was no longer the forgotten son in the shadows. I was the heir chosen not by circumstance, but by truth. I stepped forward, my voice carrying across the hall. All my life you told me I was nothing. Tonight I stand here with proof that I am not only something. I am everything you tried to deny. You built walls to keep me out, but grandfather gave me the key to walk through them. The guests erupted in murmurs. Some applauded softly, others watched in stunned silence. For the first time I saw my father's power falter. His image of control, his aura of dominance, cracked like glass. He looked at me with hatred, but underneath it I saw fear. Dorian shouted, his voice breaking, "This isn't fair." It was supposed to be mine. I turned to him. Fair? You had their love, their pride, their celebrations. I had nothing. You grew in the light, and I was left in the dark. If you cannot see the fairness in this moment, then you never understood what it meant to earn anything. The lawyer handed me a second document, confirming my legal ownership. My hands shook as I held it, but not from fear, from the weight of finally being seen. My father tried one last desperate move. "This changes nothing," he growled. "I built this company, and I will not let a weak, unwanted child take it from me." Adrian stood firm. "Legally, it is Rowan's. You may fight it, but the courts will uphold this will. Your father made his choice." I looked around the room at the faces of people who had watched me fade into the background for years. I was silent for too long. Tonight, that ends. I will not be the embarrassment anymore. I will honor the legacy my grandfather trusted me with, and I will do it in a way this family never expected, with integrity and strength. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then stronger. Not everyone clapped, but enough did for me to feel the power of the moment. I stood taller than I ever had, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally knew my worth. For the first time, my father, my mother, and my brother looked at me not as an afterthought, but as someone who could no longer be ignored. The echoes of the lawyer's voice lingered in the hall long after the applause faded. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the forgotten son sitting at the edge of the room. I was standing in the center, holding the truth that none of them could deny. The sealed envelope that once felt like a burden had become my shield and my sword. My father stormed out first, his face red with fury, his shoulders stiff with the weight of defeat. He did not look at me. He could not. For a man who had lived his entire life controlling every narrative, losing power to the son he had spent years dismissing, was unbearable. His footsteps pounded across the marble floor like war drums, but each one sounded more hollow than the last. My mother remained seated, her hands clasped together as if in silent prayer. She would not meet my eyes. The woman who once hosted grand parties with a flawless smile now looked smaller, shrunken under the weight of choices she had made. She had poured every ounce of love into Dorian, and in return she had nothing left for me. When I finally spoke her name, she flinched. "Mother," I said softly, but she only turned her head away. Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. Dorian, my brother, stood frozen where he was. His face was pale, his fists trembling at his sides. For the first time, his confidence cracked. "This isn't right," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It was supposed to be mine." He repeated the words like a chant, as if saying them would somehow undo what had been written years ago by our grandfather's hand. But no matter how many times he said it, nothing changed. The legacy he believed belonged to him had been placed in my hands. I looked at him and felt no triumph, no hunger for revenge. I only felt the truth. "Dorian, you had everything I wanted," I said. "Their love, their pride, their support. But that was not enough for you. You wanted more. You wanted to erase me. Tonight proves you cannot erase me. I will carry this legacy, not with arrogance, but with the strength it deserves." The guests shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Some avoided my eyes, afraid to choose sides. Others nodded subtly, as though they had seen the cruelty all along but never had the courage to speak against it. I realized in that moment that my fight had never just been with my family. It was with the entire silence of those who stood by and let it happen. But now, they, too, had to face the truth. As the lawyer packed his briefcase, he gave me a small nod of respect. It was not the kind of respect that came from money or power, but the kind that recognized resilience. "Your grandfather believed in you," he said quietly. "Do not forget why." His words sank deep into me. I would not forget. That night I walked out of the hall with the envelope still in my hand. The cool night air met me at the door, and for the first time in years I breathed freely. The shame that had weighed on me was gone, replaced by a steady fire in my chest. I was no longer the boy they called an embarrassment. I was the man my grandfather trusted to protect his life's work. In the weeks that followed, the family fractured. My father tried to contest the will, but the courts upheld every word of it. His pride was wounded beyond repair, and though he fought hard, the law was clear. My mother withdrew from the public eye, her carefully crafted image shattered. Dorian tried to carry on as though nothing had changed, but the sting of losing everything he thought was as never left his face. And me, I stepped into a role I never thought I would have. I walked through the doors of Harper Industries not as the overlooked son, but as its rightful heir. The employees looked at me with surprise at first, but in time, with respect. I worked harder than ever, determined to live up to the faith my grandfather had placed in me. I did not want to be remembered as the son who inherited by chance. I wanted to be remembered as the man who rebuilt the Harper name with integrity. Looking back now, I see the truth clearly. Pain shaped me, but it did not destroy me. The years of rejection carved out strength I did not know I had. The humiliation I endured gave me a voice that could no longer be silenced. And when the moment came, when the lawyer placed that envelope in my hand, I was ready to step into the light that had been denied to me for so long. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: being unwanted by those you love does not make you worthless. Sometimes the ones who dismiss you the most are the very people who are afraid of what you might become. Your worth is not defined by their approval. It is defined by the truth of who you are and the choices you make when no one believes in you. I was once the embarrassment they wished was never born. Now I am the heir to a legacy built on truth, and no amount of denial can take that away. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and tell me if you've ever felt underestimated in your own life. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to light.